Something that's always fascinated me is the idea of stories as aspects of one person in relationship and development. By which I mean that I work as a counsellor and psychotherapist. I listen to people. I listen to what's happening in their lives, and sometimes a good way to work is to shift things onto a metaphoric level, to explore things as metaphors, and in doing so one enters an inner realm of imagination, a realm of story, of pure story. And when you enter that realm, the story underlying the outer circumstances can sort itself out, not through applying the mind, but because the self becomes present, and it's the presence of the self that bends story through meaning to conclusions. What do I mean by the self? When you're talking to somebody, you begin to get to know the different parts of them. The part that's like a lost child, the part that's angry, the part that's thinks that they can get what they want through looking after other people, whatever it might be. But through that crowd of people you notice a different figure that isn't one of those. It's like seeing a figure behind a roundabout. I can't explain it very well, but you see that figure that's different from the others, and you mirror it back. You talk to that bit, you pay some attention to the others, but you address that part, and you ask them that part about the other parts, because that's the one that has all the other parts. So stories as aspects of one person in relationship. What I noticed was, from sitting with clients as a counsellor, I'd pick up a book or go to see a movie, and hey, what's going on is the same stories. So it led me to think that when I read a novel, all the characters, all the events, all the places in the novel are aspects of the person that's writing it. In the same way that when you have a dream, all the characters, all the props in the dream are aspects of the person that's having the dream. The dream is just saying, this is what's going on inside, here's a snapshot, and it borrows all the bits of things that you've taken in from short-term or long-term memory, form a prop cupboard, and it just takes those bits and it cobbles together some characters, stories, some events that says, this is what's happening inside. These are the dynamics between the different energies inside you, and it clothes these energies in bits and pieces, characters from the prop cupboard. And then it may be 20 minutes later you have a different dream that tells the same stuff but uses a whole bunch of new stuff, of new bits. Sometimes, not often, but sometimes when I'm working as a counsellor, I use visualization. And it's simply, somebody will say, my life, it feels like I'm walking through a swamp. Okay, eyes open, but imagine that you're walking through a swamp. What does a swamp look like? And so on. And you've entered that mythopoetic world, that inner world, the world behind the scenes, one step closer to the world of continuous creation, one step closer behind the scenes where things are coming into being. It's the world behind this world. It's the structure, it's the framework. It's the creative world. Some people have called it the astral. It's the world of imagination, and imagination is a sense. You don't create these things. There's an old, I first heard this in the playground at school. There's something that people do where they say, this was as kids, probably primary school I think. Imagine that you're walking down a road, and you see a knife and a plate. What do they look like? You know, but first of all you describe the road, and then whether it's day or night or whatever, and then you come to a house. What's the front of the house like? And it goes on like that, and the house is your personality, and different bits of the house is a back garden, there's a wall at the back, and that's supposed to represent your attitude to death, and the plates and the knife are the male and female side of you. But in a way, as a sort of pop way of analysing someone, it's whatever. But the main point of it is when you do something like that, you realise that you're not making this up, that imagination is a sense. It's allowing you to sense something that on some level is real. And that if, for instance, I'm with a client and I ask them to allow a symbol to arise that sums up something, it's coming up from that place, bubbling up from that place. If I suggest a visualization, it's visiting that place, that behind the scenes place. So when we hear a story, everybody has a similar set of characters and places within. It's how we're made. It's part of our hardwiring. And it's like a filing cabinet, or a system of filing cabinets. Everyone's got the same sections, but has different things recorded under those headings. So we've all got the same set of characters. Everybody's got a critic, an inner critic, the one that nags them and tells them they never get it right. And so when we hear a story and someone talks in the story about, you know, there was a child and then there was a step parent that's really critical, it's like we're playing Snap, a complex game of Snap. We take the story, simple or complicated, and we match it with the parts of us. We're really skilled at doing that. When we hear a joke, we're simply taking, you know, it might be there's only 2 or 3 characters in a joke, and but we match those characters with some parts of how we're made up, and we go, yeah, I know that bit. Or it might be a really good example. Now, some people hate this, however, but Harry Potter, the Harry Potter books, to me, that's one of the best examples of the story, of how the self develops out of all the possible selves. And it's really by far the best example I know of what I'm talking about in action. It's classic, in fact, and the fact that it's, I presume, it's not designed as such means it can work. When you take something like Pilgrim's Progress, or perhaps the Divine Comedy, that I guess is designed to express these aspects of oneself, you know, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but it's the ones that aren't meant to be that work best. So, taking Harry Potter, there's a child born into a family, and he has step-parents. Now, one link that I'd make, without going too much into the psychology of it, but because we're all made in the same way, then people's maps and models of how people tick are pretty much going to agree at some points, aren't they? It's always going to be a matter of construction rather than selection. It's putting these things side by side and saying, yeah, that bit speaks very well of how we put together. So take Freud. He talked about an id, which is a very young part to do with needs, and he talked about the superego, parental part. a recording of parental injunctions, and that he said the ego forms in the centre because of the friction between those two. So between a young part that's about needs and parental parts that's about, I would say, direction and care, then as these bits rub together, an ego and perhaps a self develops. And to put that a bit more clearly, Harry Potter, you've got an id aspect, which would be his stepbrother. You've got a stepfather, a very critical one, who's the direction aspect of the superego, but rather negative. And then you've got his stepmother, who's about care, and she certainly cares for Dudley, but Harry is like the cuckoo in the nest. So what's being described is the pattern of id and two aspects of superego, direction and care, and then within that something arrives from somewhere else, a bit like a bit of grit that forms a pearl in a way. Harry doesn't fit in, does he? So I'm not going to pursue the Harry aspect so much, but it's talking about the birth of consciousness, the birth of self from friction between psychological elements, and that it's come from somewhere else, this aspect, from a different part of the psyche. It's sort of been dropped there, it's been planted there. Take superhero comics. Spider-Man, he's got an auntie, hasn't he? Batman has a butler who's like an uncle to him. Superman has got step-parents. So one thing that I think is being spoken of here is when we're young, like toddlers, we develop inner parents in order to be around when our real parents aren't. And I think we develop two main ones. One is about direction and rules that tells us what to do, and you can see this in toddlers. When you see a toddler who gets something wrong, they'll call themselves bad, mustn't do that, that's wrong. Or if they're trying to complete a task, sometimes they'll talk to themselves. They'll say, right, you put this here and you put that there and that bit goes there, as if they're listening to instructions, but also they're being the instructing bit. They're sort of echoing what the instructing bit is saying to them. So they're tuning into the voice of the direction aspect of the superego. It's about rules, getting it right, and also tells them off when they get it wrong. A bit like Uncle Dursley. You also, so you get a kid that hurts themselves. If they've managed to interject a caring parent aspect, just what I mean is there's a mum that goes round with them that teaches them how to take care of themselves. So you see a toddler who's hurt themselves, they might start crying and sit down and start rocking or put their arms around themselves, or even sometimes say, don't worry, it's okay, don't worry, it's okay. Perhaps you've done this as an adult when you felt hurt. So a toddler's walking around with this rules parent and this caring parent, which are like step-parents, aren't they? So you can see that as we become more conscious, as we become conscious beings, we've got these two advisors or guides that go around with us that can be quite positive, like this is how you do that. You know, you're a toddler, you encounter a situation where you've got to complete a task, and so you tune into the advisor that tells you about how to do stuff, whether it's to do with social skills or education or whatever it might be. Or when there's a situation demanding care, you tune into the bit that tells you about care. So you can see you've got an advisor that's a bit like a mum and dad or step-parents. But also as you grow up, as a toddler grows up from being a baby, they still keep the baby bit, and we keep the baby bit. It's a reminder of needs, and it tells you what your very most basic needs are, which are, for food and drink, whatever, to feel good, to have attention, to all those sorts of things. What a baby needs, basically. And it tells us how we feel. This sort of advisor, there's several different aspects of it. One is, we've interjected a bit which reminds us of how we feel when our needs aren't met. And it's always, it feels this endless need all the time that can never be satisfied. A victim part that's eternally dependent and eternally hurt. There's also a bit which shows us how we had to be to get those needs met as a very young child, whether that was polite or compliance or unwell if people needed us to be ill, or whatever it might happen to be, depending on our family circumstances. And whatever we needed to do to get those needs met is still recorded there. There's also, I don't want to go on too much about this, but so we have three main advisors: rules, care and needs. And it's as if we're in the middle of a family with a father that can be very critical sometimes, a mother that can be nurturing or very withholding sometimes, and a young part that can be very needy or very bullying sometimes, switching between feeling bad for not getting what it needs or acting out the ways that it needed to get those things from a parent when they were very young. And then there's us in the middle. And if those aspects are very loud and very troublesome, and if our sense of self and awareness is weak, then our lives can be completely chaotic, can be a series of dramas where we project out these aspects onto other people and we identify with different bits in turn. I won't go too much into that, but if you Google the drama triangle, you'll find plenty of examples of that. So, where am I going with this? Do you know, what I really want to say is, there was an example of the beginning of a story, the beginning of a lot of stories. That is a child with step-parents and maybe a very needy or bullying sibling, or maybe not. Maybe the main character is the id that's going to develop. And it's a direct correlation between stories and how we're put together. Now, that's just the beginning of Harry Potter, so taking that as an example, all the different parts and all the different places that come online in the story, that start to come into the story, are different aspects of a person that they become aware of, that come into the field, that come into who they become, and that have to be balanced with each other, have to be developed. They all have to be developed. We have to have understanding of our emotions, of our thoughts, of our instincts. There's potential aspects of who we may be from the future, of wisdom and compassion, that are our teachers. And what I'd like to suggest is that I mentioned the realm of imagination, of things coming into being. In terms of our psyche, the whole pattern is there in some form already, a bit like the information in an acorn is there for the oak tree. And that because we're talking about aspects of self, on some level all the parts of our potential are there already, and that they can reach down to help us develop. A bit like in Harry Potter, how the letters start to arrive from Albus Dumbledore as a call to adventure, you might call it. a call to remember ourselves, to become who we may be, to become all that we are, and it comes from a wise part of us, who we're going to be at some point in the future. Like if you imagined the psyche as being like a family tree, this is Grandad, but it's the Grandad that you're going to become calling to you from somewhere very, very close to a place of self-actualization, of all those aspects coming together and forming a self. Terminology is difficult, like self, for instance, but we can talk about selfish and self-centered, or the self, or the higher self. Try googling psychosynthesis, the egg diagram, for a really good map of what that looks like. It's quite simple. It's a simplified version of the tree of life, and it just shows the psyche as three main realms: the lower unconscious, the middle unconscious, and the higher. The lower unconscious to do with the past, the middle unconscious to do with the present, your present awareness, and the higher unconscious is future potential. And it's as if a seed comes down from the top part into the bottom, and it grows from there, like a plant going out of mud, like a lily perhaps. And as it flowers, the first leaf is the body, second is the feelings, and the third is the mind. Then the flower in the middle blooms as a self, but the sun above is a higher self. The self and the higher self are of the same stuff. That's a technical word. They're the same qualitatively but different quantitatively, like a candle flame and the sun. So, to ask again, where am I going with this? Every story, every single story, shows part of the great story. I'm not talking about something abstract. I'm not talking about the hero with 1,000 faces, although that's, like everything else, is part of it. I just mean that every story reflects how we're made, is part of who we are, and how we're made reflects the world that made us. Archetypes aren't purely a human thing, because we're a product of the world. We didn't, Mundanican aside, we didn't drop off a spaceship, so although people talk about us anthropomorphizing the world and giving the world around us human characteristics, it's the world that anthropomorphizes us. The world gives us human characteristics. The archetypes are born again in us, and there is a collective us. There is a collective us that has the same pattern. The tree of life is quite... Try reading a couple of books by Will Parfitt. I'd recommend Beyond the Elements, which is about psychosynthesis, and also whichever his latest one is about Kabbalah. Can't remember the name of it. It's on the shelf somewhere. Do you know, I despair of putting everything together. It is all together. What it's like a passion flower. If you've seen passion flowers, they have different arrangements around a centre of different numbers of things, and everything does fit together because the centre's the same. So, stories as aspects of one person in development and relationship. Do you know, I find it impossible to read a book or watch a film without seeing that in action, without interpreting it as if it was a dream showing aspects of one person. It's given me such joy. The Hudsucker Proxy. That was a good film. What can we say? Let's just take one at random. Let's take Hamlet. There's a Prince of Denmark, there's his family. Lots of people kill themselves or get killed or die off. And it's certainly a tragedy, but looked at in terms of aspects of one person's development, there's an unsuccessful something new needs to come in. Now what's his name? Fortinbras at the end, he comes in and takes over the court of Denmark. It's simply that those aspects that developed weren't able to sustain, they weren't sustainable. Something else needed to take over. What else can we pick? Do you know, one of the best ones I think is what's that called? It's A Wizard of Earthsea. That's the one. Now I thought it really explained really well all the aspects of self-developing. You'll notice a lot of similarities with Harry Potter, and yeah, there's one bit where he goes to a place of study. It's a bit like the name of the rose. There's a place, and the positions of the people there in the monastery or whatever it was echo the functions of the psyche. So switching about, there's the developing subpersonalities, the aspects of who we are in their earliest stages, and there is also them at later stages of development, which are our teachers. Even though we haven't developed them, they're present in a fainter form, and so they can teach us to become like them. This works on an individual level, in that the archetypes are there within us, leading us to move forward. So how can I describe this? I can picture it. Imagine an egg shape, and imagine that's a cage, that there's bars coming up, starting at the bottom and then meeting at the top, and several in the middle. The subpersonalities start at the bottom, and if you catch them at different stages, they look different until they meet at the top as a completed, a self-actualized self. If you were to take a slice at any point, it would be like a mandala. Stories as aspects of one person in relationship. I really wish I could just, you know, the thing is that it's all there, it all fits together, it's really complete, it's really detailed, and it covers absolutely everything, but it is so difficult to explain. Board games, sports, taking board games, take a game of chess. As a counsellor, when I talk to people, if I'm a shit counsellor, or you know, there's some jobs where you need to do it, like being a doctor, but if I was a shit counsellor, I'd see a struggle going on between two parts of somebody, and I'd take one end of the table, and which I decided was the good end, and I'd start playing against the bad part of them, which isn't very helpful. What you need to do is, they've got a game going on. You walk over and you say, there's a game going on between white and black, say, between ego and soul, because the history of our lives is a history of a struggle between ego and soul. And you say to the person playing the game, so what's it like to be this side, what's it like to be that side, how do you think the game's going? And in doing that, you're talking to the part of them that is playing the game, that is the game, but can know that it's their game, that can be disidentified from it and aware of it at the same time. But the structure of chess, it's got pieces, it's got events, which are the moves, and it's got places, which is the board, and it is like a psyche, or pick one, Ludo, you know. It's just the structures of how we're put together is evident in everything we make. So let's take a library indexing system, a catalogue, or all the parts of the internet or something. I'm just talking about the structures that how we explain to ourselves the areas of our own learning and understanding. That index is the signature of God. That is the pattern. That's if you were to take all the different sorts of cars in the world and put them look at the different qualities that some are sports cars, some are lorries, some are tanks or whatever, and then you put them next to a medieval bestiary, you'd have the same things coming through. And medieval bestiaries, they had land animals, and then they sort of assumed that there'd be the same thing in the sea. You had some sea lions and sea bishops and all sorts of stuff. Let's say that you had a poster of all the different fish in the sea, and you were in the National History Museum and you're looking at examples of all the different rocks in the world. Or let's say that you're talking to somebody and you say, how can I put this? It's the same set of things. If someone was to design a Lilliput Lane village, those little model houses, if you had a full set, it would be the same as anything, anything. It's the same. It's the same. It's the signature of God. It's the same thing. I really wish I could explain it more clearly. It's the letters of the alphabet. It's runes. It's the same set. We all get the same set, and that if you look at the whole pattern, it's the same pattern. If you get a class of kids at school, it's pretty similar to every other class of kids at school. So you're going to get the naughty ones and the bright ones and the ones that are studious and the ones that mess about and blah blah blah, and the one that wets his bed, and you get the same set pretty much. And that if the school is there for a number of, you watch a class go through school, they develop in certain ways. So all those aspects are present in one person. Everybody gets that set. When you get two people in a relationship, people split up those different bits between them. Some people get a double dose of one, some people don't get to identify somebody as the responsible one, someone's the irresponsible one. When you get a group of people, it turns back into a classroom again. That's just how it is. It's the same pattern, whether it's in one person, in two people, in a group, whether it's countries, whether it's people working in an Oxfam shop, whether it's it's going to be the same kids from the classroom always, whether it's the planets of the solar system, whether it's the Greek gods or the Roman gods or whatever. It's very simple. It's as complex as everything. Stories as aspects of one person in relationship, because we are a product of the world that created us. That pattern is in us. Everything we make reflects one aspect of it, and we have a deep understanding of what that set is. We know instinctively, and as I said before, when we read a story, whether it's War and Peace or whether it's a joke about an Englishman, an Irishman and a Scotsman, we understand that what's being spoken about here is that pattern, and that it can be simple or complex, and we things that we experience, whether you see something or things around you. You know, there's just so much to talk about, and it's the same thing again and again, and I don't know how to say it differently except by wittering and waffling and just keep throwing things into the middle. Stories as aspects of one personal relationship and development. I really have loved the Harry Potter books. It's just I've learnt so much from them. I've learnt, for instance, that it's not certain which one is going to be the self. It could have been Draco Malfoy. If he had been more successful, then he would have been the self. And it happened to be Harry. There was no certainty it was going to be Harry. It also illustrates really clearly that when the ego tries to, well, it's as if there's Harry, who's the self, and Dumbledore, who's an archetype close to the higher self. Then there's Draco, who represents the developing ego, and he becomes a pawn of the lower self, or how can I put it? Aspects of one personal relationship and development. So all the attempts that the ego makes to destroy the self teach the self exactly what it needs to overcome the ego, but it's not set that this will happen. Nature, unaided, fails. Thinking of my own life, I didn't find Hogwarts. Hogwarts is always there. There's a possibility of Hogwarts. A place where you can learn and grow and develop. I found mine when I was about 34 in a treatment centre. So it would have been nice to have found it at 14, but that wasn't quite to be. But it's always there. There's always the possibility of using whatever the circumstances are to move forwards. There's always, the story it tries to unroll. It really, really does. It really, really does. As a counsellor, my job is simply to allow people to put out, to just lay out all the different aspects of what's going on, so things can be updated without somebody getting in the way and telling them what to do, without somebody identifying with one aspect of that and being that aspect and bullying them from the point of view of that aspect. If you can lay out everything, and better still, if there's some way to turn that arrangement into a metaphor, it's not always necessary to do that. There's times when that helps. Then a story can't happen unless it can inhabit characters and objects, unless it can borrow. We're always doing that. That's how we're made. That whole thing from the occult about, I don't know, the Emerald Tablet and everything. It's simply that we create a world inside us based on the world outside us. It's a world of metaphor, and everybody, from doing visualizations with people, everybody has a different inner world and different inner stories. Don't be kidded that everybody's got one myth. There's books that will tell you that. We get the lot, we get all of them, but there's times when some myths are more important. And don't try looking for Greek myths or whatever sort of myths. You know, that you don't have to translate it into Greek in the same way that the world of symbol or the world of dreams, you don't have to translate into psychobabble or into English. They are what they are. A unicorn is a unicorn. I really hate those books that tell you that a dragon is entropy or whatever it might happen to be. It's a dragon. It's a fucking dragon, you know. It's not one simple thing for everyone. It's a dragon. Stories as aspects of one personal relationship. I guess I'll stop there, but it's just the most important thing. All I can suggest is Next time you watch a film, next time you read a book or come across a story, it could be a real story or it could be a work of fiction, but let's take a film. Take any film and just imagine that here are all the aspects of one person, and it's not just a painting, it's things are changing. That principle has been used in magic and ritual for a long time, in that you causing changes in consciousness at will. We have the pattern inside us. We are inside the pattern. And if you change which bit is up in us, or in a drum, then you can change which bit is up around. Things can develop in certain ways, but you have to work. The trick is to become identified with yourself, the real part of you. One of my hobbies is historical fencing, and I remember training with somebody, and we had swords, we had fencing masks, and he would keep hitting me over the head, over the mask with bloody swords, saying, do something, do something, do something, just trying to get me to build up reactions and ways of dealing with assaults, with attacks. And what I noticed inside was a series of all the different bits of me in turn popped up to try and cope with the situation. There was a hurt child that wanted to cry. My lip was trembling. Luckily inside the mask I wanted to cry, so he'd stop hitting me. The next bit was a spiteful bit. I noticed that when we stopped one day, I suddenly hit him round the head once he stopped. So a spiteful bit. That didn't really help either. Then there was the bit that wanted to try and make him laugh all the time, but he still kept hitting me. Then there was a bit that wanted to analyse it and talk about it, but he still kept hitting me. But the only bit that could cope with that situation was me, was myself. And the biggest fact about myself, the thing that distinguishes it from all the other parts of myself based on strategies, is that myself is connected to something bigger. I'll call it a higher self, but it's connected to purpose. That's what distinguishes it. And values are not cultural. They come from that connection. So I'll leave you with an image of that magician card, one hand up and one hand down. I've talked about the early pattern of the child and parent aspects. They're right at the bottom there. They're never going to go away. We'll always have those bits. A victim and a critic and a rescuer that are very unhelpful at that stage. They're not developed. So I need to reach one hand down to manage that pattern that's going on, and particularly to take responsibility for the hurt part of me that's caught up in that, and look after them. The child in me, that once I reach down to it, I need to pay attention to that, to the child parts of me, and as an adult. And the only way I can be an adult is to reach up in turn for help. So to be the self, and to reach up for support, and to reach around for support. And there, for me, is the crux of the story. The child and parents, the nursery pattern at the bottom there, really. Then the adult aspect. And the adult aspect, you're kind of at the centre of a rose window of all the functions of the self. Like the teachers there, but they move from being teachers to friends as you develop, and then above you is purpose, is wisdom, is compassion, is values, is principles. It's and when you reach one hand up, you're you know, what's at the top or deep within, or wherever, whichever direction you think of it, it's transpersonal. It's beyond the personal. It's beyond just you're then in yourself for the first time, but also outside. You're connected with something bigger, to a much larger world. So I'm going to stop there, and I've no idea if this has been recording, because I switched the screen off when I put Audacity on. So let's have a look. Let's see if there's a little line going or not. Let's find out. I have no idea. Have I recorded this? Yes, I have, by the look of it. That sounds cool. So I'm going to turn it off now. Stories as aspects of one person, a relationship and development.